Mr. Nelson, if you don't mind, maybe I can call you Chris.
By all means.
Thank you for making time for business and politics.
A pleasure.
All right. So the last time we talked to each other was, your visit to the Manila Times, and since then, we've been hearing these things from different people about the ease of doing business in the Philippines. And the Philippines already has a law, right? But I was wondering why people keep bringing it up. I mean, from your perspective, what's the situation on the ground? What's the missing pieces to actually making easier for you guys to be here?
So I think the ease of business will always be a discussion topic.
Okay.
And I think in the case of the Philippines, I'll give you a couple of an example. So obviously during the Duterte administration, at the very end, they passed 3 bills.
Right.
One was the Retail Trade Act, Foreign Investment Act, and the third one is the Public Service Act. Now, to my knowledge, the Public Service Act still does not have the implementing rules and regulations.
No, it doesn't,
The other 2 do.
Yeah.
And to me, that probably kind of highlights some of the challenges. And the reason for that is, if you take the Retail Trade Act, the designated department to do the IRR was the Department of Trade and Investment. It was done very quickly.
Okay.
We were asked to consult. If you now look at the Public Service Act, it involves multiple agencies. That's where things become much more complicated and delayed. Now, I think when we come back to ease of doing business, we have to be realistic and focused. So I'll give you an example as well. So some years ago, we were invited to a meeting at the Department of Trade and Investment, DTI, of course, want to encourage investment of foreign companies and so forth. If you look at setting up a company in the Philippines, I think it'll be very difficult to emulate Singapore.
Yeah, you can open a company and dissolve it on the same day, probably.
I mean, it's like in hours.
Yeah.
So I think what we've got to look at in the Philippines is, what is our advantage? We want to get companies here because this in itself is a very important market. And now we can also use that as a gateway to Southeast Asia. So we need to kind of focus on what companies need to get here. And I think where it can do, improve particularly individual departments or agencies, their own processes. Obviously, if you do it electronically, that's a big help.
Okay.
I mean, as somebody who's a permanent resident of the Philippines, one example as a personal note is that you can renew your driving license much easier.
Okay.
And now it goes from, I think it was 3 years, then
now
it was 5 years, now it's 10 years.
Yeah.
So I can renew on my next birthday next month to 10 years.
It's 10 years, but unfortunately, I think you have to go back to the LTO to get your medical exam every 3 years. But granted, it's been a big improvement.
I mean, I think this is the way we've got to look at it. What can individual departments do, and what can be done in terms of electronic process, right? Submissions, so
digitalization.
So, to come to your point, why does it make a difference? Of course, companies coming will always look how easy is it for them to do business compared to other venues. But we've got to look at what advantages we have here and try to get them here, and then say, yes, you can expand now into Southeast Asia. And that's why the ratification of RCEP, which was
so important,
is so important.
Yeah. Now, in Congress, and they're talking about amending the Constitution under the auspices of making the business easier. Do you think that's a solution, or the argument against that is that there are many other things that can be done simpler, less politically divisive than amending the Constitution? In practical terms, you said it may not be fair. I think you said that before when we met, that it may not be fair to compare the Philippines to Singapore, but certainly there should be some improvement, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way you got to look at this is that, and I'll come to your other question, is that the Philippines has to focus on its advantages, right?
Right.
I think it's very hard to, as you rightly said, Singapore is a very good example where you can make a company in hours or dissolve it in hours. And that's very hard to, almost anywhere in the world, let's be honest.
Yes.
Now, if I come to the specific question of the charter change, let me make a couple of points. The first is the Philippines, if I understand correctly, in its constitution has economic barriers.
Right.
They're known as
land ownership.
Yeah. Negative investment.
Equity caps, yes.
Now that's quite unusual for a constitution, first of all. So from that point of view, I do think it is worth considering. However, we're also cognizant that the Constitution obviously embraces a much broader base, and that will obviously raise concerns. I think that is always I think removing those economic provisions would be very useful.
Okay.
No doubt. Can they be done in other ways? You could pass specific laws to have those provisions changed, as I understand it. I would think, of course, the process may be longer, could be challenged. But I think that the trend here to further liberalize the Philippine economy is very good.
Okay.
And one thing I just want to emphasize to everybody who might be watching is the Philippines does not operate in isolation.
Okay.
So we're competing against many other countries in Southeast Asia, and they are also trying to improve.
Absolutely.
So therefore, for us to really get that investment and to get people, we need to keep that liberalization trend continuing. And I would just like to make, I think, a reference. There was a recent article by, I don't know if it's an interview, I think it was an interview from Secretary Pascual.
Okay.
And he was talking about RCEP. Mm-hmm. And he said, and I thought that was a very fair point, let's focus on the advantages of RCEP and not the potential disadvantages. It's always a way of looking at things.
Sure.
You know, it's the half cup, half full kind of thing. And I think that was a very fair point. So, yes, I understand the concerns. I do think there's a key to keep the momentum going. And if we can further liberalize and open up the Philippine economy, and there will be issues like land ownership, of course, but obviously investing is key for companies, then I think you'll see further benefits coming forward.
Okay. Well, I was just wondering, I mean, and if you don't mind me pressing this point a bit, the last time we saw each other was at the Manila Times Economic Forum, and one of the speakers, Ambassador Melvin of Denmark, was saying that, half jokingly, that the Philippines was very good at innovating red tape. And he had some anecdotal story. He was being funny about it, but he was saying that, he just arrived in the Philippines at a certain month, and then his experience with the Bureau of Customs, I think bringing in his car and his items was just not a pleasant one. And of course, he has no certificate. He's assigned here, but I would think that for businesses, that would be quite concerning. I mean, I was wondering if you've heard of similar anecdotes from your members, right? That low-hanging fruits that the government could look at, right, before it opens up, this whole thing about charter change.
Yeah, I think that the key you've got to change actually is outlook and attitude. In the sense, let me come to let me give an example.
Okay.
And I'll relate it. So we're reviving the Great British Festival. It will take place this month, 25th, 26th. So that's Saturday, Sunday of March in Bonifacio Global City. And there'll be a display of obviously British companies, and there'll be culture, obviously British music and arts, and it's being set up. I mean, the proponent is the embassy. We're helping to manage it, and the British Council is involved in the cultural program. Now, why do I raise this? We're doing it in a very short time frame.
Okay.
And because it's a very short time frame, we've made a deliberate decision to go for companies who are already here.
Okay.
So major leagues will be there, like Shell, Pru Life. We've also got some of our new members. We have one called CyberQ, which focuses on cybersecurity, a very relevant topic, etc., etc. Now, of course, this would be a great venue to bring in new products.
Right.
But we took the decision not to do it because we know getting it cleared by customs, by also the FDA, Food and Drug Agency, would take too long.
Right.
And to bring it to a specific point, we had a virtual trade mission in September with the Kent County Council. That's a council, an area just outside London. And one of the speakers, or I think they were, one of the speakers was the FDA. Now, after that was over, the companies wanted to send samples. These are not commercially to be sold, but samples to various companies. And it took us 6 weeks, even though we had a contact with FDA, and then customs, because of the different, well, I need this, all that. So for me, this is an example, right? It's a sample. They're not going to sell it commercially.
Right.
But if you want to start a business, of course, the Philippine companies, the importers want to see the product.
Absolutely.
So these are areas where we need to improve. And the issue, of course, comes is that customers will say, well, look, I'm only following what I'm supposed to do, right?
Right.
In all fairness. And likewise for the FDA.
Right.
So it needs to have things like, okay, it's a sample. We're not going to be selling it to the consumer. We're not going to go on the retail market. But the companies concerned need to see, discuss it, and without that, it's very hard to make a decision. And that's kind of, I think, crystallized a small example, and I linked it to the festival. And we had a company, actually, who does bring in new brands, and they also concurred and said, look, it's too short a time. So, and I think we've got to change things where people say, okay, I want to do business, right?
Right.
And if we want to do business, we have to be doing it in a way that makes sense. So clearly, for example, if you're only bringing in 5 or 6 or a limited quantity, it's not for commercial concerns. And it's not going to be by the consumer. So you can, there's a less risk, right? You're just looking at it for a commercial side. And you can move those things forward. And that's just one example, right? So, but I do think the ease of doing business is a very distinct challenge. And I say that because it requires somebody going through process. It requires, and I always say that, I'll come back to my first example, it tends to work best when one department has it. But without that, and it really requires, and I don't underestimate the challenge. But I do think it can work, and if that moves forward, then I think we can. It's another advantage to us, or another opportunity.
All right. Well, we'll just have to take a quick break, Chris.
Sure.
We'll be right back with Business and Politics with Mr. Chris Nelson of the British Chamber.